All right, welcome back to the Dr. Doug Show. Today, I've got another great interview for you. Today, I interviewed Shawn Wells. Now, if you haven't heard of Shawn, Shawn is known as the world's greatest formulator, and that means of supplements. So, this is an interview where we go into great detail and depth about not only Shawn's story, which is really compelling, but also about his research and the work that he's done in the supplement industry. He has formulated over 700 products, and he has a number of patents on his own products. He's really big into products that are great for mitochondrial health, great for increasing muscle mass, and we talk about what he thinks would be great from a bone health perspective. So we kind of dig into this. We go into a lot of great depth in those areas specifically. If you are still trying to find the right supplements, this could be an interesting one for you. If you're into doing a lot of research on supplements, following Shawn would be a really powerful thing for you to do because Shawn is always putting out content about different types of supplements. So enjoy this interview, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, Shawn Wells, thank you so much for joining me on the Dr. Doug Show. Super excited to have you here.
Oh, I'm pumped to be here as well.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, listen, I'd love to give the audience a little bit of your background, and I'd probably better for you to say it than for me to say it. So why don't you give us a little bit of kind of your story, how you got into the supplement space? I think this is an interesting trajectory into where you are now.
Yeah, well, thank you first off for having me on and it is a bit of a hero's journey and I'm proud to be where I'm at. Not everything's linear like we like to make it on a podcast or in books, but I did have a big pivot moment. And for me, that was when I got very sick. I ended up being in bed for about 6 months uh, with Epstein-Barr, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, Hashimoto's. I literally was crawling to the bathroom. I felt like my whole world was ending. Uh, I was in school working on my master's at the time, and I was in such a dark place that I was considering suicide. Because it just felt like my life was over and I would never be able to go back to school. I would never be able to finish up. I was someone that had big dreams of working in supplements and nutrition and here I was supposedly an intelligent healer of sorts and I felt like I was dying. And at that moment, I like really started digging into supplements, nutrition, not just as like a school academic path, but like a true passion because I wanted to find a way out of bed and get back to my life, or for all intents and purposes, life was truly over for me.
Wow.
And that's when I started going down the path. This was in the late 90s of paleo dieting, the keto diet, fasting. And up until that point, I was doing a lot of like bodybuilding supplements and working out a lot. But then I started delving into immune health, longevity, and really going down that path, like understanding the mitochondria and how I could improve my cellular energy. And that's what led me to really become passionate not only about nutrition and working out, but designing a path for longevity that can help people heal and really ultimately be more energetic. I feel like a lot of people are struggling with metabolic syndrome, with dysfunctional metabolisms, with insufficient cellular energy states, and I certainly was not alone. So that was a big inflection point for me.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. And, obviously, it's always hard to hear somebody going through that, but you were able to find a path forward. Can you give us a little bit about where you are now? I've heard that you're called the world's greatest supplement formulator, that's a great tagline to have. So give us a sense of sort of how that then progressed through your professional trajectory and where you are now.
Yeah, that is my title, and I appreciate that people have dubbed me that. I think here's the thing, Doug, is that anything that you are super passionate about, anything that you do in your free time, on your weekends, on holidays, and this is what I do. Like I'm constantly looking up research, I'm constantly looking at studies, I'm constantly buying supplements, trying different ingredients together, doing different stacks. It's become an obsession for me.
Yeah.
And if you're someone that's intelligent and hardworking, that's one thing. That's certainly a piece, the discipline and your intelligence. But another piece that's so critical is the passion.
Mhm.
And I love what I do. If I was not getting paid a dime, I would do it. Matter of fact, I would pay money to do what I'm doing. So that led me to where I am. I've formulated over 1,000 supplements. I've patented 40 unique ingredients. I've been doing this for about 25 years. I've traveled the world and spoke in 60 different countries. I put out a best-selling book. Like it's taken me so many places that I would have never believed possible, but I mean, it honestly, when I was starting out, I don't even know if it was really a career that you could find anywhere. Like supplement formulator, that's not going to be something that your guidance counselor tells you about. So, uh, I don't know. I carved a path through just true passion.
Yeah. Well, and that's those are the best paths, right? I think when somebody has like I interview people all the time in this the functional medicine integrative space, and you can really tell the difference in somebody who has a true passion for something, and a lot of times that comes from a personal struggle. It's unfortunate that that has to come from there, but those do make them the most, I think, aggressively pursuing, professionals in the space because they've seen it, they've lived it, and it is, those emotions you can't get away from that. You can never
Hmm.
forget that. So,
Hmm.
yeah, super powerful. And your book is called The Energy Formula. Is that right?
Correct.
Yep.
Yes.
So for those that are now looking up that book, it's called The Energy Formula. And it is on my short list to read. I've not read it yet, but I'm excited to read it because energy is really really important. So then let's get into that a little bit. I obviously want to talk about bone health. I want to talk about muscle health because most of the people listening to this are going to have osteopenia, osteoporosis. They're looking to improve bone health and muscle mass. But cellular energy, you said a couple of things there that really stuck out to me. So cellular energy is so important. Mitochondrial health is so important. And in order to do the things that we need to do from a lifestyle perspective for bone health and for muscle mass, we got to feel good, right? We have to have enough energy. We have to be able to get out of bed. We have to be able to do more than just our activities of daily living. So can you give me, maybe if this is the right way to say it, sort of your top three approaches to mitochondrial or cellular health? Can you drive us down this pathway a little bit?
Sure. So it goes down to one, ergothioneine is one of my new absolute favorites, L-ergothioneine. This is a trace amino acid that occurs naturally in mushrooms, certain beans, and organ meats. And what's amazing about ergothioneine is there is a unique transporter for it in your body just for this nutrient. That tells you how important the evolution is of our bodies to have that transporter that's unique to this nutrient. And Dr. Bruce Ames, famed longevity researcher, calls it the longevity vitamin. And it is being researched to potentially be a new vitamin because we've shown a deficiency for it. Your body doesn't make it. And it's truly required to protect your health. And where we find that it works on is not just as a cellular antioxidant, but as a mitochondrial antioxidant, protecting the mitochondria and therefore having incredible impact on cellular energy and your overall health and energy. And what we see is whenever we look at mitochondrial health ingredients, the cells that are the most energy dependent in the body are the ones where these ingredients have the greatest impact. Meaning, when we look at like cardiomyocytes, meaning heart cells, the heart muscle cells, or we look at the brain with neurons, that's where we typically see mitochondrial ingredients have the greatest impact because they have the greatest need for cellular energy or ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And so ergothioneine does have a massive impact in those areas. And when we have a deficiency of ergothioneine, we see cognitive decline and we also see an impact cardiovascularly. So I love ergothioneine, probably secondarily CoQ10. Uh, my preferred form is ubiquinol, the reduced form. It seems to be more bioavailable, especially if you're over 50. Maybe the Mito Q form, that may be a superior form. It's a synthetic form that's got some interesting research, but I'll say ubiquinol or Mito Q. And then PQQ is kind of a sister chemical to CoQ10 and assists in this electron transport chain. And maybe lastly, and most interestingly, I'll throw in methylene blue.
Mm.
Ethylene blue is not a dietary supplement, so you have to be careful where you're sourcing it from. It will stain your tongue, stain your teeth blue, and yes, when it comes out in your urine, if you take a fair amount, it'll be green. If you take a lot, it will be blue. Yes, your urine will be green or even blue. So be aware of all that. But it is powerful, in particular for people that have suffered with mold, mycotoxin exposure, definitely things like Epstein-Barr, these kinds of conditions that have really impacted the immune system and therefore autoimmunity, and ultimately that mitochondrial dysfunction that we typically see go hand in hand with that. So those would be a handful of ingredients that I would certainly
Amazing.
look at to affect mitochondrial health and energy.
Yo, that's an amazing list. Yeah, I've been learning more and more about methylene blue, and it's on my short list of things to really inquire about and find sourcing for. Because I think a lot of our patients are actually they're in that group. You know, they're people that have struggled with either a virus exposure or mold
Yeah,
exposure. You know, something that their body is challenged to fight its way back from. And I think, yeah, I agree that there's so much evidence and certainly anecdotal stories about people who have seen tremendous improvement with methylene blue in particular. I wanted to go back to ergothioneine. So that was really interesting. You know, it sounds like essentially it is an essential potentially nutrient, right, that we're missing. And I love the fact that like these things still pop up and we're like, oh, look, there's this receptor for this thing that we can't
yeah,
make. So like we have to be getting this through some source. And then supplementation makes it easy to do unless you're consuming a lot of organ meat and mushrooms, right?
correct,
Is
correct.
there a product out there that has ergothioneine in it, or is this relatively new?
Uh, yes, full disclosure, I have brought products to I brought the ingredient to the market, and there's some other companies that have the ingredient now as well. But yes, there are products that have it. And if you want to get it naturally, like I said, if you're eating organ meats, and in particular of all the mushrooms, the king oyster
Mhm.
is the strongest. If you want to get a branded pure form that's fermented, that's L-ergothioneine, that's vegan friendly, where you can just dose it higher, it's going to be the branded form is called Mito Prime. And
Mhm.
um, and what's interesting is when we first started working on it, like 5 years ago, the doses that would have been typical in the diet that we were looking at, and a lot of the studies were correlated to diet, were around 5 milligrams. And so we were saying 5 to 10 milligrams. But now, as the price has come down and we've been able to play with higher doses, we're seeing it be pretty experiential at
Mhm.
25 or even in particular 50 milligrams has been really exciting. And there may actually be like a loading effect similar to this is where we need more research, a loading effect similar to creatine, where because there is this transporter, it's called the ETT, the ergothioneine transporter, or it's also known as OCTN1. Um, that there's not only this transporter, but there's unique storage system for it. Like your body stores it, and when it needs it, it calls upon that storage. But
Hmm.
we typically have very little in our diet, so most
Right.
people are not storing anything. But it seems like maybe this higher dose could help have an acute effect, but also store plenty so that you can call upon it when you're immunocompromised, when you have more energy demands, etc.
Yeah. And just to clarify that, so that's Mito Prime, not Mito Pure, which I think a lot of people are going to find when they if they Google that. So Mito
Correct.
Pure being the urolithin A product, right?
Correct.
So different, totally different thing. So Mito Prime is a very specific. Is that's a patented ingredient?
Correct.
Is that the way to
Correct.
say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And urolithin A is interesting. I actually want to see more data. A lot of the polyphenols are very interesting because and we could have talked about this too. There's like NAD boosters, things like nicotinamide riboside, NMN, even niacin in general, which is nicotinic acid, um, that are going to boost NAD levels. And then a lot of the polyphenols, things like fisetin in particular, maybe urolithin A or um, chlorogenic acid, EGCG, pterostilbene, resveratrol,
Yeah.
they're going to inhibit NADAs, also called CD38, this enzyme that breaks down NAD. So if you take the combination, it could be particularly helpful to boost NAD levels. And NAD is a cofactor in that process, like of making ATP and
Krebs cycle.
the Krebs cycle. Yeah, the
Yeah.
citric acid cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you commented on urolithin A. We get a lot of questions about MitoPure because they have such a great marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So then Mito Prime is available from a couple different companies, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
several companies. If you go on Amazon and just look for the branded.
All right. Sorry to interrupt this interview with Shawn Wells, but I just wanted to say that if you are still confused after listening to this and you need help putting together your own program and you haven't been to our masterclass yet, please come to our free masterclass. You can look for the link in the description below on YouTube. It's absolutely free. It's an hour of me talking about the common myths and misconceptions, which we're always updating based on our experience. And then we also have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions from the audience. It's super fun. We do it about every other week. And if you haven't done it, please do it. It's totally worth your time. So let's maybe shift away from mitochondria. Not that they're not important, but everybody here wants to know about bone health. So what's your experience with supplements for bone health? And you and I have not talked about this, so this is our first discussion around bone health. So I don't know where you're going to go with this, but I'd love to learn sort of what your thoughts are around bone health and supplements for bone health, because your perspective is going to be probably different than most people in this space.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective as well. I think, a lot of people go for calcium, magnesium, but just kind of 101 level stuff. They're not getting enough vitamin D3. They're not getting the K2 that are important cofactors in like the VDR receptor and osteoblasts and this kind of pathway that we would talk about with osteoblast targeted gene expression. And so osteoblast, like meaning like osteo meaning bone, and blast meaning like we always use that term to mean like the creation of, kind of like the genesis of any type of cell in particular. So this would be the creation of bone cells and part of binding calcium and the other minerals into the bone matrix. And so I'm a fan of taking like a desiccated bone matrix or having, bone broth and things like that because collagen is going to help strengthen bone. Colla is Kola, which is the Latin root for glue. And a third of the protein in your body is collagen related, is that connective tissue. So hair, skin, nails, gut, bone. And so we always think of protein as muscle, and that's, two-thirds of the protein in our body, and it's very important. but the other third is absolutely critical as well. And collagen, as we know, tends to decline with age, and we tend to get more porous bone, and we tend to get more sagging skin, and we tend to get more, uh, you know, less tight junctions in the gut, and our hair isn't as strong as it once was. All these kinds of things that we see with a reduction in collagen. So I want to see like typically a bone matrix of some kind that has the calcium, yes, but also the magnesium, the strontium, the boron. I also want to see someone taking vitamin D3 and K2. There is some other ingredients that are interesting that have supported bone density. Some people have looked at the soy isoflavones. There's an ingredient called ipraflavone, um, epimedium, which is horny goat weed, which a lot of people think of related to libido and those kinds of things, but it actually does have the icarin is associated with bone metabolism. One of my favorites that's very uh, not well known, but some of the most like powerful data that I've seen um, on osteogenic markers is called Cissus quadrilangaris. Yeah. Um, and that one's a really cool ingredient. In particular, where I find it fascinating is there's been some data not only on an osteoblastic side, but also with fractures and outcomes around fractures. There's some other ingredients like there's one called bicolin um, that are in the natural dietary supplement space, and then there are some peptides and growth factors like BMP mimetics like BMP2 and BMP7, some of the parathyroid hormone fragments
Mm.
and things along those lines as well. So those would be the ones that I would recommend. But here's another thing is there is crosstalk between tissues. All tissues in the body are living and dynamic and constantly remodeling. And so the more muscle you have and the better you use that muscle, the more it's going to impact the bone structure that is supporting that muscle, that infrastructure for that muscle, and vice versa. So, and there's also adipose and bone crosstalk. There's adipose and muscle crosstalk, and there's hormones that are associated with this crosstalk. And these tissues are very living and very dynamic. And like I said, constantly remodeling to use as less energy as possible. That's why like sitting syndrome is a thing where your body, if you sit way too much, your body will start to remodel and think that sitting is your default position.
Right.
And so then it gets hard to stand up and do squats and do the things that we need to do. So where I was going with that is if you have healthier, stronger muscle, it's going to lead to healthier, stronger bone.
Yeah.
And when we do more resistance training, even there was a study done with people over age 90, and they saw dramatic increases not only in muscle mass and strength and innervation to recruit that muscle, but also in bone mineral density. In just, I believe it was 6 weeks that they looked at this with people over 90. So, using your muscle is key too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I could summarize all that to say that bone, like the way I look at bone now, after I've been looking at this for the last several years, I really look at bone, both density and quality, really as more of a biomarker of health span, right?
Mm,
Like
hmm
if your bone is degrading, you're missing something. Usually you're missing multiple things.
Yeah.
But I find this is definitely true in my audience that has osteoporosis, but also now that we're starting to talk to younger and younger audiences, we're seeing that, if you're losing bone density, if you're losing bone quality, you need to look under the hood and see what you're missing, because it could be hormone dysfunction, it could be nutrient deficiency, it could be, the sitting syndrome, right? It could be a lot of
Yeah.
things. But it's a sign that we need to pay attention to and we need to be monitoring. And that's just a really important message that I'm trying to deliver everywhere now, because we're not, the younger adult audience, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are not thinking bone health. They're not measuring bone health. And there's so much you can do. I mean, you just mentioned all these things that I've looked at all of these. I want to double click on some of them, but I've looked at all of these things, and they all, for the most part, can independently improve bone mineral density when studied as an intervention, right? Like, all of these things are potentially powerful. How you mix and match and stack them, that's the art of it.
Yeah.
But you just mentioned, I have a list here of like 10 things that you just mentioned. I want to double click on a couple of them though. So the first thing I want to talk about is the VDR. So the vitamin D receptor, for those that don't know what VDR is. I
Hmm.
think this is a really interesting area because you mentioned vitamin D is important, and I absolutely agree, especially if someone's truly deficient. But there's a little bit of a controversy here with vitamin D when you get into,
Like
oh my gosh,
cholecalciferol versus like
yeah, like active versus
calcidiol, and yeah.
storage D, right?
Hmm.
And I'm
Hmm.
totally blanking on the guest I had a while back who was talking about this. But Morley Robbins, that's the guy. So Morley Robbins, I did an interview with. If you've read his book, Cure Your Fatigue or Cure Something, but he's all about copper. So if you're familiar with Morley's work, and he talks about, vitamin D in too high of a dose is going to have a negative impact on the ratio of active, which is the 125 dihydroxy D to 25 hydroxy. And so that's the active to storage form. The reason why he gets into this is he says that if you drive up the storage form, you're not going to have as much active, you're not going to have as much retinol, which is vitamin A, which we need to stimulate the VDR within the cell. Any thoughts on that? Because I've been measuring all of this. We measure retinol, we measure 125 and 25 to try to get a sense of what's happening. But clinically, I haven't seen it to be this clear that people that are taking larger doses of cholecalciferol, the D3 in supplement form, I can see what happens in blood, but it's not consistent with what happens with active versus storage. So a confusing question stem there. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Doug, this is a great, like, I could have this discussion for hours around so many studies and so many biomarkers. When we chase things in blood or plasma, that's one thing. But to your point, if there's storage or if there's tissues that it's just active in, then, that's a whole other discussion. And then, like, some of these things like fat soluble vitamins can be stored in the adipose, right? Like,
Mhm.
or in the liver, and we don't know when those get released, like, exactly, like, and if you're in a kind of compromised state, maybe they don't get released easily. And so there's so much here to look at.
Mhm.
It is really difficult, and I would default to maybe his research, but I can tell you, like, for example, this is with a ton of nutrients. You can have this discussion, right? Like, when you look at folic acid, for example, we all know MTHFR and what an issue that is in 30 to 40% of the population.
Right.
That the mother effer gene, as they like to call it, um, that's where people have an issue converting the folic acid to its active methylated coenzymated form called 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, or methylfolate for short. And so there's enzymatic steps to get to that active form. And we see this with a lot of things that, like, we need to do sometimes biopsies or look at wherever it could be stored in the tissues to really understand what's happening there. And unfortunately, the easiest way to look at most things is to just look at blood or plasma, and it's really not telling the full story. To your point, like, I can think another ingredient I help bring to market is ketones, like BHB.
Hmm.
And when we would look at BHB, like, a lot of times, we would see, oh, BHB levels when we look early at someone supplementing or getting into ketosis, or all the different ways that you could show endogenous levels in the body, levels of BHB, it would be high at the beginning. But as someone became more keto adapted, it would get lower and lower and lower. Why? It's not because it's taking more to work. It's actually that they've upregulated these receptors. They've
Hmm.
uprated the signaling. They're actually using them in the tissue and taking them up more and better. So it doesn't mean that like it's not working because my levels aren't high enough. So this is where it gets confusing and you can constantly chase this rabbit down the hole.
Yeah.
So what I would probably look at is, yes, if you can look at calcifidiol, the active analog
Right.
of vitamin D3, awesome. But also, just like as you're saying, looking at some of these other markers. And I love that you brought up health span. For me, the number one thing that I look at, like I mentioned this in my book, when you're talking about mitochondrial health, that's always going to tell the story of you and propensity towards disease and your biological aging versus chronological aging.
Right.
So, what I look at there is glycation, oxidation, and inflammation. And so if I look at CRP, I'm going to tell inflammation. If I'm going to look at hemoglobin A1C, I can tell glycation. And, I could look at like oxidized LDL or something like that and see oxidation. And I got a pretty good picture of where you're at in terms of your health span and your biological age.
Yeah, and so there's so many ways to measure, and we really lean on serum, on blood, and so we are looking at some of these markers. But you're right, going back to the fat soluble vitamins, it's we've seen some consistent trends for people that are on massive doses of cholecalciferol for all of D3. We do see retinol seem to be lower, right, as you measure it in blood. And we have seen this sort of weird reciprocal drop in 125 or active D, but it's not the same across the board. And we haven't been able to notice any clinical difference in outcomes. So improvements in bone mineral density, et cetera. So I don't really know what to think of that, except that I don't think that we need to be taking massive doses of D3 at this point. I don't know that there's evidence to support that, but definitely need to be supporting it if you're deficient, because we know a deficiency clearly is a bad thing. So it's
Well,
just, go ahead.
one
Yeah.
area, Doug, that could be an issue is melanin, right? And like if you're darker skinned and you tend to wear a lot more clothes, be in these northern climates where they get less sun and they wear more clothes. So if you're a black male in New York City, it's
Right.
going to be different than if you're a white person down in Mexico or
Right.
what have you. So sun exposure is one factor, but the amount of melanin in your skin is also going to be more of a factor
Yeah.
as well.
Right. Yeah, and of course, natural is always going to be better too. I think, if we can get it not from supplementation, but you're right. If you're dark skinned and you live in the northern side of the world, then it's really, really tough. I wanted to mention or go back to something else you said too. So you mentioned parathyroid fragments in a peptide conversation. Can you get more specific there? Because one of the drugs, if we don't use pharmaceuticals a lot, but for people that are a really bad starting point, using pulsed synthetic parathyroid hormone or Forteo and Temlos, those drugs are compelling to use as a tool to get people out of a really bad starting point, just to drive bone metabolism in the right direction. I've often said, boy, if there were a more natural or easier to access version of those drugs, I would love to find it. So you mentioned parathyroid fragments. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I just know of like it's teriparatide, PTH1-34. It's an injectable, what we call like osteoanabolic therapy. So like that means that it's going to boost that osteoblast function. So it's going to enhance the creation of bone. So it's anabolic to bone, meaning
Right.
creating more bone. So it's just that's the one I know of, and it's not leading to like I know excessive hypercalcemia, which can be an issue with a lot of these things. That, as you know, like too much calcium in the blood, in the serum,
That's a bad thing.
can be a bad thing
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
number
We
of
don't want that.
reasons. You don't
Yeah.
want calcification in your arteries, in your heart, etc. So that's been a concern with a lot of this overdosing calcium supplements through the
Right.
years, where we actually see negative outcomes, especially when it's not done in conjunction or in concert with D3, K2, and really
Right.
the whole bone matrix.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And so teriparatide, so my understanding is teriparatide is the generic name of the drug Forteo. So
Mhm.
teriparatide is a pharmaceutical. Do you know if it's available outside of that industry?
I have seen it, yeah, on the market. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's it's because it's like a fragment, a PTH fragment.
Right.
It kind of, yeah, it'll show up on the peptide sites. Yeah.
It's in the peptide world. No, I've never seen it. I'll have to do a little bit more research there. Cool. Then let's move on to the muscle side. You mentioned earlier if your muscles are healthy and happy, your bones are going to be healthy and happy. And I think that's absolutely true. We see sarcopenia or muscle loss and osteoporosis hand in hand. I don't know which one's the chicken and which one's the egg, but if we're going to build them back, we need to build them both back and focus on them both. So, what can people do from a supplement perspective, from a muscle mass or muscle strength goal perspective?
Okay, so some things that are going to show up, almost like I said, how the you're chasing what's in serum and what's actually active in the tissue. Another thing that shows up a lot is the two sides of the equation. So I was mentioning before about like having the NAD boosters and then the things that inhibit NAD's breakdown, right? And then you're kind of net as you get more NAD. So same here with muscle, we want to look at anabolism or the growth of muscle, and we want to look at catabolism, which is the breakdown of muscle and how to reduce the breakdown. And so net, we want anti-catabolism, increased anabolism, and then that leads to greater muscle accretion or accumulation or growth. And so the things that we know that work for anabolism are going to be obviously protein, in particular, high leucine protein, which is typically animal protein. Yes, this is going to be a bummer for vegans listening, but leucine is very low in general in vegan proteins. So, what you have to do with a vegan protein, if that's what you're going to take, is take addition. There was a study done on this where you either had to take twice the leucine, twice the level of the vegan protein to equal the whey protein. So they had to take 50 grams of the vegan protein versus 25
Right.
of the whey, or supplement the difference in leucine, which is probably the easier way to do it.
Right.
So if you're taking vegan proteins, make sure you're getting enough leucine. What's important though is there's what we call a refractory effect with leucine, where it's not a matter of taking it all day, every day, all day long, and you're going to get like this anabolism constantly. What we see is that the faster it spikes, the more it turns on and optimizes muscle protein synthesis. So it's more of a speed and to some degree the amount that affects this. So this is where like a bolus of protein or a large amount of protein is better. And we used to be told, like eat 8 small meals a day and kind of have like these meals throughout the day with, a little bit of protein. That's actually not the way to do
Mhm.
this. What we find is it's better to have a high protein meal spiked 3 times a day, maybe even if you're a bodybuilder, let's say 4 times a day, could be ideal. And we want a fast delivery of leucine. So, what I worked on and brought to market is a dipeptide of leucine called dileucine, where it's luteal leucine, two leucines put together. And there's a unique dipeptide transporter in the gut that uses um, it's called PEP1. It's actually di and tripeptides. It preferentially takes up faster than a single amino acid. And what we find is the dileucine is 189% faster than regular leucine. And as a result, we saw 60% more muscle protein synthesis gram for gram. So dileucine, if you're really looking to optimize muscle, could be even better than leucine. And on the other end of the equation, we also see these leucine metabolites that are anti-catabolic. So things in particular, probably the most studied is HMB. And then also another metabolite that's interesting, it has a lot less data, is something called HICA. So those are both interesting. Overall, I do think for muscle power, strength, anabolism, creatine is always good, and it does protect bone as well. So it also protects the testes and the ovaries and the eyes and a number of tissues throughout the body. So I am a huge, huge fan of creatine. It's also a methyl donor and protects DNA and maybe protective against cancer. But
Right.
a lot of great data around the brain and brain health. So creatine is a great one for muscle and bone. So those would be some of my most important ones to get.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned the dileucine. It's it's a product that I'm interested in. I'm always looking to see, how can we optimize our patient supplement stacks because there are, I see people come into our program that they're just on, 40 different supplements and they have like a $2,000 a month supplement
Yeah.
budget. And I think I'm great that they're interested in it, but finding the things that are most impactful to help with capsule fatigue and also just what are you absorbing, when you're hitting all these things. So yeah, I think, I love the leucine conversation and, our listeners for the most part and viewers are aware that if you want to follow a vegan diet, that's absolutely your choice. And I support everybody in doing that who wants to do it, but they have to understand the challenges that come with that. And leucine is a big part of that. And so, we talk about that. We've talked about adding leucine to different food sources or different proteins. I wanted to double click on that a little bit and just ask about specific products that are essential amino acids or branched chain amino acids, because some people will use these products rather than leucine by itself. Do you think there's value in taking these things independently or potentially adding these to a protein powder if you could tolerate the taste of doing that? What are your thoughts on EAAs and BCAAs?
I don't, he- Here's where there's data on it. But I would say the data where it's most compelling is where they're in a protein and calorie restricted state.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's going to be the most compelling because these are, in fact, essential amino acids. The BCAAs are essential as well and part of the EAAs. Um, the EAAs are going to be present in any protein. And if you're in a positive nitrogen state, if you're getting enough protein throughout the day, you don't need to worry about EAAs and BCAAs. If you were a bodybuilder and you were looking to cut calories and looking for every advantage possible, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But most of your patients are not going to be bodybuilders that are restricting calories. Um, so I really don't feel like it's necessary. I think a good whey protein or a vegan protein that's leucine assisted, I'll say, is plenty. And then getting, it's maybe like one or two shakes a day plus, getting a couple good meals in a day, you're good to go.
Yeah.
You're good to go. So I don't feel like that is necessary. The only factor to me that matters if you're getting enough protein is leucine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think what's interesting about our audience is that because we have everybody track their food, at least for a short period of time. And I don't think that most of them know it, but most of them are actually under eating and they
Yeah.
are underfed. So I use them in this population in a way that's almost like a bodybuilder who's trying to cheat that, right? Like let's get more muscle protein synthesis while
Yeah.
cutting. So it's almost a similar situation where they're just not able to consume enough whole foods yet, but we get them there. We get them there. So yeah,
Yes.
it's an interesting, I guess it's a biohack to try to really push that muscle protein synthesis when they're in this underfed state, because a lot of them are when they come to us.
So that totally makes sense. And what I've seen, what's interesting is I've studied this idea of anabolic or leucine resistance with age. I was
Yeah.
actually talking about it about 15 years ago and doing research in this area. And what we see is that with age, it actually takes more and more and more leucine to turn on muscle protein synthesis. And the reason I believe that is because anabolic hormones and insulin sensitivity decline. And that's
Right.
why if we were to see, a testosterone replacement and DHEA and maybe growth hormone get added, and we were to take metformin or dihydroberberine or, something along those lines, we may actually see the anabolic resistance or leucine resistance, said differently, reduce. But yes, like it does. What's frustrating is the older people get, the lower and lower their protein boluses are, and the higher and higher their protein needs are.
Right.
So this is like that double whammy. So I understand exactly what you're saying, and I used to employ similar techniques when I worked in acute and skilled nursing facilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just that balance of finding again, like how much food can we get somebody to consume? What is their
Mhm.
gut health like? What are they absorbing? And then let's just fill in the gaps wherever we can. But no, I agree. Once you're getting adequate protein, once you're getting, you're able, especially if you can tolerate whey, you're going to be getting plenty of muscle protein synthesis for
So
sure.
just to add to this, because this is an important point that you're bringing up about, I really feel like if people are taking way too many supplements, I've seen this and I believe this to be true. There's going to be a few things that haven't been documented, but I believe to be true. That I believe that the liver is changing the cytochrome P450 enzymes when there's too many things coming in. There's too
Hmm.
many things because you're taking too many supplements, too many medications. It's going to like turn down the rate at which these things can come through and how fast they come through
Right.
because it's just protecting itself.
Right.
That's one. And two, I feel like a lot of people have dysbiotic guts and leaky gut, and so that can be an issue.
Right.
And then lastly, I feel like a lot of, and this is one that's not well documented, but in my heart of hearts, I know to be true. And I've been someone that's gone very deep down a plant medicine path, and this is really an important idea for me is the autonomic nervous system. And if someone is chronically in sympathetic nervous system in fight or flight, you are not in parasympathetic rest and digest. Your body is not going to be taking up nutrients well
Right.
if your nervous system is dysregulated. It's not in a position to. That's
Right.
not the best use of its function at the time. It thinks it's got to divert resources to surviving. So it's not worried about healing and absorption and nutrients. It's worried about how do I survive this exact moment?
Right.
And a lot of that is self induced, where we're not literally in fight or flight, but our nervous system is creating that scenario. And so I think for a lot of people, if they can do breath work, meditation, and find ways to regulate their nervous system, I also believe a lot of these nutrient deficiencies and disease states could improve dramatically.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's why we in our program we talk about the lifestyle side of it. We talk about stress mitigation. We talk about mindset because again, I see this almost universally in our patients where they are wrapped in this fear mindset, this anxiety mindset. They are chronically just circling around their fear and their worries, and that puts them in a sympathetic state. And so I get chicken, egg. I don't know if they're worried about the osteoporosis, if that was the cause of it, or if they always had that and that was their underlying. And like it's such a challenge to figure that out. But I absolutely agree, and that's why I tell people you're not going to supplement your way out alone. You have to do all the things, or at least all the things that you can think of from a lifestyle perspective. And supplements certainly can help. That's why we're having this conversation.
Mhm.
But they are a part of the picture, not the whole picture. I want to just one more question, and then we'll wrap this up. I talk often to we have a community called Osteo Collective, and it's growing really well because we have so many people that are interested in improving their bone health, and it's worldwide, and it's awesome. So we can touch a lot of people that way. One of the things I mention often in our weekly Q&As is that the idea of rotating supplement stacks and pulsing something for a period of time and then coming off is something that I think is relevant, maybe not for everything, but I think for a lot of things. I'd love your input as someone who's looked at the research more than anyone else. What is is there a predictable path that is going to optimize supplements when it comes to pulsing, turning it on, turning it off, taking something for a while and then switching to another pathway? What are your thoughts on that approach versus taking, the same thing for the next 40 years?
I love this question. I get this question a lot of different ways, and I think it's a really important question. I I believe in the idea of what you're alluding to is pulsing. I also believe maybe more on the quantum side of the Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton kind of side of the equation of just intuition.
Yeah.
And I definitely rotate. For example, I love the adaptogens. That goes back to kind of allostatic capacity. We didn't talk about those, but um, it kind of leads to greater resilience. And so I think taking things like ashwagandha and rhodiola and maca and some of these compounds are very powerful. Ginseng, there's a number of them. Many of the mushrooms are adaptogenic as well. But I love the idea of just rotating through them. I love the idea of sometimes I take larger doses and smaller doses depending on if I do feel immunocompromised, if I do feel more tired, and I'm sensing that. That another great tool is like I'll use my Aura ring. I got Aura and this Ultra Human I'm testing out. Like
Nice.
I'll look at that data too. I'll look at the HRV. I'll look at my body temperature, and make a decision. Like, maybe I'm gonna load up a little bit more today. And then I also take vacations. Like sometimes when I travel, I don't take anything. I just like take some time off and just eat food and kind of reset. As you know, like this idea of, uh, for example, we talked about testosterone replacement or hormone replacement therapy, TRT, HRT. When you take, for example, exogenous outside the body testosterone, your endogenous inside the body production of testosterone will go down because it's sensing it doesn't need to make it anymore. And there's a lot of adaptations. There's a lot of what we call homeostasis, sorry, where the body's just trying to maintain a balance and not waste energy making things that it already senses is coming in. So it's true that if you're taking tons of antioxidants, that it doesn't need to make as many antioxidants.
Right.
And so you'll see that. And that's where I do believe what you're alluding to, that, taking these things pulsatile makes more sense. And, when we do look at bodybuilders and steroids and things like that that have been used since the 50s, in bodybuilding circles, whenever they would take hormones, they would do pyramids, right?
Right.
And then they'd even cross different hormones and kind of crossing over pyramids of things. And so they'd, kind of ratchet it up and then ratchet it down. And they'd even do that with their diet. They'd do, instead of just a straight line down, they would kind of go up and down a little bit, up and down a little bit, but over time it's going down in calories so that it's something that the body doesn't adapt quickly to. And, that's the same in weightlifting, like the idea of periodization. So I do think that idea makes a lot of sense, and that's what I've employed through the years myself.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And then, of course, the question, the follow-up question that everybody asks me then is, well, what do I do with this supplement and this supplement and this supplement? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, there are infinite variables in here. So we just have to, make our best guess based off of what the mechanism is and what to combine when so that it's logical when you are getting these, like I love that picture of the pyramids, right? So like what is this combination of things doing and how does that overlap with this one? And, mix and match all of that together. Fortunately, most of our audience they're focusing on the same goal, which is to improve bone and muscle. So it's a pretty clear pathway that we can do for relatively long periods, and then maybe take shorter breaks in between there. But they're starting from a point which is, anabolic resistant, like you said. They have sarcopenia, they have osteoporosis, and they need to build, 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 build. So they, you can't do that forever, but you can certainly do that for prolonged periods of time.
Mhm.
So, Shawn, this has been awesome. We could do this for hours and hours, but I try to keep these under an hour. So let's kind of wrap this up. Any last thoughts for the audience, specifically on supplements?
Sure. I mean, just follow ShawnWells.com, ShawnWells. I have tons of great information there. Newsletter that's free on all the supplements. If you go to Instagram at Shawn Wells, I have a lot of infographics and just cool stuff we put together on stacks and new ingredients you've never heard of and all the good stuff. So, and any question you have on this show or just want to ask me in general, I answer all my own messages. So, message
That's
me if you have
awesome.
any questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, John. And that's Instagram is actually where I first saw you. And I agree. Great content. So I'll have to check out your website as well. But thanks so much for your expertise and time. This is a really important topic for our audience, and I really appreciate your background and knowledge and all the new stuff that you're bringing to market.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doug.
Thanks for listening to this interview with Shawn Wells. If you enjoyed it or you have questions, please leave them below on the description in the comment section on YouTube. And if you want to follow Shawn, you can look him up where we said. You could also potentially grab his book. I think he's got some great resources for everybody. So I would encourage you to have him become a part of your ecosystem on social media. And remember that a diagnosis of osteoporosis isn't the end, but deciding to reverse it is a beginning. I'll see you in the next video.